Hi, this is Michael Kennedy. I want to give you a quick overview of code execution in a standard ASP.NET web application. So let's look at this sort of split world here. On one hand, on the left in blue, we have your web browser, and on the right we have our server running ASP.NET. And typically that's running inside of IIS. So the browser starts out by making an HTTP request to our server. The request comes up, IIS is listening, it routes it into ASP.NET, and it hits what's called the ASP.NET pipeline. The ASP.NET pipeline is a series of steps that ASP.NET runs through. You can plug into this and execute your own code there, but typically we don't in most applications. And it runs through these steps for things like authorization, login, various things like that. And then what its final job is to do is to choose something called an ASP.NET handler. Now this is a generic term for sort of the final destination for your request. So the pipeline is going to choose something like a web page, maybe a MVC controller, or it could even be, just very focused code that's going to return some kind of response. But in most applications this is a web page, as in a web form page, or a controller in the MVC world. Now it's here that we see our first bit of code execution. There's several steps that happen when your handler is processed, and the order and whatnot that this happens varies a little bit between web forms and MVC, but generally the idea is we have some form of code behind, or code that is executed in the web page style, web form style. There's a code behind that gets executed associated with the page. In MVC the code actually executes before it selects the view. But basically you have code you've written in C#, it runs on the server, and then the system is going to select a view to show as well, some sort of ASPX or CSHTML file, and there's another additional step of ASP.NET compilation to turn that HTML template into compiled code that can execute as well. And then at the end of this whole process, HTML is returned back to your browser. The browser ingests all the HTML and processes it and turns it into something called a DOM, the Document Object Model. And within the DOM it can look and see that there are things like CSS links and image links, and important for code execution, JavaScript links. So when it finds that JavaScript links, it's going to go back maybe to the server, maybe to a CDN or somewhere else, and pull down that JavaScript. And here on the client side inside the browser we're going to execute some additional code. So maybe we're using jQuery to do some animations or hook some events. Maybe we're using some other JavaScript library to call services on the server. Something like that. So maybe our JavaScript goes back and modifies the DOM. In the case of jQuery, maybe we make an AJAX call back to the server, and if it hits our own server, there's a very good chance it's going to go through the very same ASP.NET pipeline, handler, and experience to get to some kind of service. It could be Web API or MVC or something like that. And possibly other content is loaded back from the service, goes back into the DOM, and so on. So you see there's these two distinct areas where code is executed that we write. One, C# code on the server in the ASP.NET handler location, and another in the DOM after our HTML is loaded, entirely after the response from ASP.NET. So these two areas give us a lot of flexibility to write rich applications. Finally, it's worth noting that there are other technologies on both ends. Instead of ASP.NET, maybe we would use Node.js or Python or Ruby on Rails or some other web stack, but in the Microsoft world ASP.NET is far and away the most popular. And on the client side we also have less popular choices like Silverlight or Adobe Flash or something like that, but JavaScript and pure HTML are definitely winning the day right now on the client. So here's the sort of code execution balancing act that you'll see in a typical ASP.NET web application. Hope that's helpful. Thanks. Bye.